Okay, so I'd like, first of all, to thank all the speakers for very interesting presentations. There certainly does seem to be some quantum leaps, as was referred to over the past 5 years, particularly in the mix between fossil fuel and renewables. And also I'd like to thank them all for keeping to time as well. That's great. Of course, we have question and answer session now, so we'll obviously turn it over to the floor for any questions that want to go forward for our panel to answer. No? Okay, sorry, thank you. Yes.
Hi, Michael Westwater, Scottish Government Planning Policy. I had a question from the last presentation just in regards to the Orkney Smart Grid. You spoke about the thermal storage solutions and everything. I'm assuming that you're looking at an energy network as a whole, electricity and heat, as opposed to just electricity. Am I correct in assuming that?
Yes and no. Yes, we're looking at it, but as the wires business, then there's a boundary to how far we can go. So we have to work with partners and other stakeholders to look at the heat network. Now Shetland's been very foresighted and fortunate that they've had revenues up there to be able to invest in a heat network. And the large-scale thermal store that I was showing there is an expansion to the capacity of the local heat network. And then the operation of the smaller scale thermal stores is again within that local context of the heat network and taking a holistic view on the energy needs.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Okay, can I ask a question then? For Julian, yes. you spoke about the national grid and 3.5 million tonnes of carbon saved. Is that over the past, is that per annum or is that over the past 4 or 5 years?
So that's as a direct result of the earlier connections from Connect and Manage. That's in the last 2 years.
Okay. And there seemed to be a shortfall in meeting the renewables target. Is that 10 gigawatts committed, so 5 outstanding, was it?
So we need 15 more gigawatts of renewables to connect in the next 5 years, but we have 31 gigawatts contracted, so we got more than double of what is required. So obviously, the levy control framework, that's £7.6 billion per year by 2020, that is what is going to put a cap on that.
Okay.
That £7.6 billion has obviously been sized to get the amount of renewable generation that is going to meet the 2020 target.
Okay.
So we've got more than twice what we need, and that is the challenge, because people in this room say, well, I fancy a bit of a grid connection, and they say, okay, well, 2025, when people in this room might want 2018, and the reason why it's 2025 is because we've already got twice what is required. So it's not there's a lack of capacity. People think there's a lack of capacity on the transmission network. We have got more than twice the capacity of renewables that this nation needs. The trouble is that it's been allocated to other people whose projects may or may not come forward. And we know they all can't come forward, so there's not enough money in the subsidy pot to make that happen.
But again, Steve mentioned, the potential of renewables. It seems as though there could be a structural issue there, not being able to exploit it, within the existing network that we have, within the grid, and possibly moving to local systems, in effect, which are off the grid. I don't know if that's the solution, or you see.
So, I mean, we won't go to the level of renewables that Steve spoke about unless there's subsidies, because renewables is the most expensive form of energy we have on our system.
Sure.
So that's why it's heavily subsidised. Obviously, as we get into the 2020s, there's talk about onshore wind becoming grid parity, but because we've had to distort the market to facilitate renewables, fossil fuel generation now gets a subsidy through the capacity mechanism. So renewables are always going to need a subsidy so they can compete with non-renewables with fossil fuel generation. So unless it's a fundamental market reform again, where actually wind is at grid parity and it can compete competitively with gas-fired power stations, carbon capture and storage stations, then this market is always now going to be subsidised from this point on, both fossil fuel and non-fossil fuel generation.
Okay.
So unless the next government increases that £7.6 billion, then so that we need to increase the pot for subsidy, and the cost of renewables needs to fall considerably.
Well, the message I got from your presentation was that might be unlikely. I don't know. You're still waiting for that announcement.
So Thursday is the big day. So Thursday is the first round of contract for difference. Obviously, the year before election, the amount of money that's being put into this round is quite minimal. We think there's £1 billion left of the 7.6 billion that the next government can put forward, maybe at the end of 2015 or maybe the end of 2016. But obviously, it's the first time that renewables has to compete in a market, whereas the renewable obligation scheme, you get your £50 a megawatt and that's it. And whether the nation needs it or not, you get £50 a megawatt. Under the contract for difference, it's a competitive allocation, so there'll be easy to develop sites, low cost of financing companies, low cost of access to sites. Their strike prices that are put into the contract for difference that we're going to get announced on Thursday may be much less than the £95, whatever the admin strike price is, and maybe that'll be down maybe around the £60-65, who knows? We'll find out on Thursday. Once that market signal is out there to say, you know what, we can develop onshore wind for 55, 60, 65 pounds, then that would be a clear signal to say to the market, that is the price you got to get to. In any future round, a Labour Control Framework Contract for Difference allocation, you would assume that the whole point of this is to drive down costs. So you would assume that £95 that it was set at this year, that is the last time we'll see that, and it'll be much less in the ongoing years as the technology develops and the cost of building these assets falls.
Okay, so you see more as a bearing down on cost, in effect, and price of energy, as the driver there. Yeah.
And as we know with offshore wind, I mean, their target was to be down at £100 a megawatt by 2020. The admin strike price at the moment is 145. So they've got to get a third of their cost out to become even vaguely competitive.
Any other comments from the panel on that? Yeah.
Yeah, I guess probably just picking up on a couple of points. I think as you know, I mean, we're not setting government renewable targets as kind of ceilings. You know, I think if technologies improve, if things become more economic, our job is to facilitate and connect. So that's certainly what we will be doing and what we have license obligations to do. Probably just picking up on Steve's point about DNOs and DNOs, responses to connection applications, or whether a DNO's a barrier, and genuinely, we have 2 DNO licenses. What I would say is hold your DNO to account. There's guaranteed standards of service. They need to be complying with those standards. And I think you can, certainly from our perspective, I'm sure it's the same from SSE. If you want to come and speak to us about particular connections, come and speak to us. You can put in a connection application, if you wish, but please come and speak to us if you're looking at developing schemes in certain areas, and we'll give you a heads up as to what some of the issues might be. But we are absolutely, I think that the regulatory framework is very much focused on making sure that DNOs, TOs, the SOs are at the centre of facilitating low carbon technologies. We're absolutely committed to that. So just, again, in response to Steve's point, hold your local DNO to account, because it's not acceptable if they're becoming a barrier in some of the ways that Steve's experience is showing.
Okay, any further questions from the floor? No? Okay, I asked a question of David, the Orkney Smart Grid. You're saying about the generic nature of the network and its application, mainstreaming it across the UK. I mean, Orkney is quite unique, isn't it? It's a low density and not specifically urban. I just wondered whether that demography caused any particular challenges in your experience there, transferring it to, say, Edinburgh or Glasgow as a network technology.
I think it's the geographies takes people's attention first of all, about the sort of rural and the spread out nature of all the islands up there. But from an electrical point of view, the layout in Orkney can also be considered as an electrical island. And you'll find electrical islands in lots of other places. It's basically how we can define our distribution networks and consider the boundaries. And the back on the slide that I had there, I was showing the constraint points and the sort of nested logic within the system. So basically that template can be taken and applied to just about any network. Now, whether there are the characteristics in terms of having the demand and the generation that will be responsive within that area is another matter. So UK Power Networks are applying the same technology on the south side of London, I believe. Western Power Distribution are using it in their network, and they're doing some other commercial variations on the theme as well. So SGS have taken the core technology and quite successfully applied it to other networks and transmission level as well.
Yeah. Another point that came across to me was this commercialisation issue, yes. Obviously, the figures didn't quite stack up, but nearly there, so to speak, with the battery storage system that you referred to. But within the domestic market, are such calculations so critical from consumers? Or is there other drivers behind their desire to become self-sufficient in terms of energy supply? If you don't mass it up into a commercial venture with intermediaries, etc., and you just get the kit within the home, and you save energy through that means as well. That seems to be a different scale, a different sort of unit. I don't know if your experience is helpful there.
Well, the challenge you have with the domestic, they tend to use most of what they're actually generating from the roof. There's not much that goes back into the grid. That's why you don't need DNOs for the smaller applications. So we've never really come across any barriers with the domestics. It's the larger commercial ones, which are the ones really that we should be looking for to help us all, not just commercially, but for the to help the grid, to help the power supply. So it's the bigger ones that's the problem.
Non-domestic industry, in effect, business, offices.
Yes.
That's the next venture for the commercialisation of these systems. Yeah,
that's right.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions at all before we break for coffee? Okay, thank you very much, and obviously thank again the panel for their contribution today.